Hi, I'm Ken Reis here at my Log Cabin Museum. This is called the Campbell County Log Cabin Museum. You're at 890 Clay Ridge Road in Grand Slick, Kentucky. I started building these cabins in the early 80s because I wanted a place to store things, and that evolved into something else. So I started building these cabins in 1983. I decided I wanted a cabin to store things in, but it eventually evolved into something more than that. I now have, in 1983, I had my first open house. I took two old cabins and rebuilt them, and now I have a museum. I have probably 1,000 visitors a year, and over the years I've had lots of school children come through here. So we have a lot of things going on here. I have collected antique farm equipment, and our claim to fame is Mary Boone, Daniel Boone's sister, is buried in the cemetery next to our property here. As you can see on the front of the sign, our area was surveyed October the 10th, 1797. So that's really we consider the starting date of Grand Slick. Grand Slick got its name from the fact that John Grant was one of the men who came here after the Native Americans and found salt water coming out of the ground. And at that time, they decided to boil the water down and make it into salt to be sold. We were one of the first businesses in Campbell County. So that happened over a period of about 40 to 50 years. At that point, then salt was readily available in other places, and it wasn't an enterprise anymore. Grand Slick was the second post office in Campbell County. So our area was settled very early. Newport was settled first, but then we were settled very shortly thereafter. There were settlers around other parts of Campbell County, but this was a very early settlement where people were already living by 1800. Okay, what I'm standing next to is a big kettle. This kettle was similar to what the John Grant and some of the men who decided to make salt water with, and they would boil water down in big kettles, and after a certain amount of time, the salt in the water would crystallize. You scrape the salt out and you sell it by the bushel. The cabin here was two old cabins that were originally two different places. One was the White Tower area of Kenton County. The other one was a one-room log schoolhouse here in Campbell County. Excuse me, the White Tower area was in Kenton County. The schoolhouse was in Campbell County. The building itself was put up from the two cabins together. There wasn't enough logs left of either cabin to reconstruct it. When I put it up in 1980 or finished it in 83, the idea was to make it look like it had always been here. So I left all the trees around it. Many people coming here had assumed that it was a pioneer cabin and it had always been here. That was the whole point. It was supposed to look like that, but it's only been here since 1983 as far as when I finished it. The porch is bricks that I've salvaged from old buildings. Originally the porch was wood. I had some termite problems, so I replaced the porch with bricks, and they're all handmade bricks out of buildings from all around Campbell County. And when I drive around, I'll find remnants of buildings, and I'll collect some old bricks, and that's how the porch is made. As I walk down here, I'm standing on a brick sidewalk. This sidewalk goes all the way to my house, which I live next door. And these are bricks out of St. Mary's old church in Alexandria. These are all handmade bricks. And when the church was torn down in 1983, they were going to get rid of everything. So I asked them for 6 truckloads of broken bricks. And I dug out the ground between the cabin and the house and put a sidewalk all the way to my house. Now, as I have here, this is part of Gupser's Mill. I'll show you my steam engine in a little bit, but this is part of Gupser's Mill. Gupser's Mill was in the 12-mile area up in southern end of the county. It was a saw and grist mill for almost 150 years, and it closed in 1987. It was torn down in 1987, and at that time, the remnants of it was hauled away because it was going to collapse. So I have a few things here, and I eventually now, within the last year, have the steam engine that powered the sawmill, which we'll see, and I'll have it in action here in a few minutes. Okay, what I have here is a big bulletin board, and it has information on Grand Slick and southern Campbell County. I have information about the family who owned this property, which was the Baker family. They were the descendants of Daniel Boone's sister Mary, and they were also early settlers to the area. I have information about salt making. I have information about the Grand Slick Baptist Church, which is on the other side of the fence. And what might be interesting at this point to say is that the cemetery, even though it originally started with the church, has almost always been an independent cemetery that has nothing to do with the church. And it's not called Grand Slick Cemetery, it's called Oakland Cemetery. But no one really calls it that. Everybody nicknames it the Grand Slick Cemetery, which is fine. But it's a it's a public cemetery. Anybody can get buried in, and has been, and there's a board of directors in charge of it. On my right here is a 1922 Fordson tractor. Ford tractors were made since the early teens. This particular tractor was abandoned, and I was able to get it. It was rusted from one end to the other. We scraped it down. A friend of mine gave it 3 coats of paint. It's actually an oversized Model T engine in it, and it actually had no water system except it boiled. It didn't have a water pump. So it was a tractor. Fordsons were the tractor in the 20s, and in the 30s it was overtaken by John Deere International and everybody else. In front of the tractor here is the cornerstone out of the old church. It's 3,000 pounds of sandstone. I brought it here in the back of a half-ton pickup truck, which was a major mistake. Okay, we're standing from my original log cabin. I started this cabin in 1980 when my children were very small. I finished it more or less by 1983 when I had my first open house. Inside of it, I have a large collection of things people have given to me. I find almost every year somebody drives up and in the process will say to me, I have something that belonged to my grandfather. He passed away. We don't know what to do with it. Would you want it? So my comment always is, yes, I'll take it. I won't ever sell anything I have here. Everything I have here is collected. What happened to it after I die is another whole question. Whether my sons will be interested in it or not, I'm not sure. But at any rate, the contents of this cabin is filled with artifacts from people's collections of their family. Well, let's walk in and look at it. Okay, inside the cabin here I have a collection of photos as I built the cabin, and then I also have information about the cabin which I give out to visitors. Everybody comes here ends up going home with a brochure that I've made up about the information on the cabin. I have a visitor's log, which people have signed now since '83. I've had people from probably 25 different states who are visiting other relatives, and the relatives would bring them here. On the walls here are all kinds of antique farm equipment and tools that people have donated to me. Each one has a story. We won't go into every one of them today, but there's a lot of interesting stories behind all this. In front of here, the cabin, I have a skull of a buffalo that someone donated to me. I have horse collars. I have antique buggy wheel, a hoop that actually came off of a covered wagon, my antique stoves, and all kinds of miscellaneous that came out of houses. The cabin itself was originally, as I said before, 2 old cabins. Here are pictures of the 2 cabins. This is the one from Whitestown in Kenton County. This is the one-room log schoolhouse, which was called Oak Grove Schoolhouse. In fact, I found that afterwards. My grandmother went to school here, so it had many personal feelings to me. I have a blackboard, which is an actual slate board that came out of an old schoolhouse. My original intention was to make this into a model one-room school, but it fastly filled up with everything else, so it's not anymore. I do have a couple old school desks here people have donated to me, and I do have a large collection of antique school books that go back to 1890s up to about 1920. As you'll see a tom-tom there, which I've made. I do have a Indian teepee, which I put up periodically. It's a 16-foot Oglala Indian teepee. I know full well, as everybody who's watching this probably knows, Indians did live in teepees in Campbell County. But I thought it was an interesting thing. I used to take it to school and show children how it's put up. But Indians did not live, they live in wigwams in this area, but not teepees. But I think it's part of our Native American heritage, and I always try to show children about that. By the way, I was a school teacher for 32 years here in Campbell County, and now my profession is I am working at Cincinnati Children's Museum. I am the buyer for the Children's Museum. Now, for all the toys that children play with, I'm the guy who buys them. So I never thought at 61 years old I'd be buying toys for children, but that's what I'm doing these days. Here inside this case are a lot of old medicine bottles, bonnets that women would have worn when they were out and working in the fields. I have miscellaneous tools, medicine gloves that were used for a run on a horse-drawn sleigh. So I have miscellaneous things. The corner over here is a collection of things dealing with tobacco. Probably of all the things raised in Campbell County, it was the #1 crop for about over 125 years here in Campbell County was tobacco. Tobacco was the main crop. I have an example of tobacco hanging from the ceiling that was pulled off the stalk. I have an actual stalk that was growing, and I brought it in here in the pot. I have tobacco sticks, tobacco spears, and other things related to tobacco farming. So I think that's an important part of Campbell County heritage is tobacco farming, though it's on the way out now. This particular case in front of me has a lot of other artifacts. These are household items mostly. Wind-up phonograph, a butter churn, really early 1920s toaster. I have a butter press, a coffee grinder, some old wooden shoes, and then some artifacts from my great uncle who was a member of the State House of Representatives. It was Charlie Warsh. He was fought in World War I. He was gassed by the Germans in the Argonne Forest. Got a Purple Heart from it and survived. I have his mess kit and his shaving mirror. And the picture here on top of the case right here is Mr. Warsh, my great uncle. He was a state representative for almost 10 years in Campbell County. Okay. Well, we're standing right now in front of a 1900s hay press. It's a John Deere. In the 1800s, everybody in town, of course, had a horse, and you had to feed your horse. So hay was hauled to the town by various means, but eventually it was taken to town by a railroad car. Well, railroad didn't like to haul loose hay. It wasn't cost effective. It didn't get as much into a railroad car. So they went to the manufacturers of farm equipment and asked them to come up with a way of compressing it. So this is a hay press. It's not a hay baler. The hay baler picks up the hay. This is a hay press. A hay press is one. Cut the hay with horse-drawn equipment. Produce as we have right up here in the front, we have a different kind of hay rakes. So you pile it someplace, pull this out with either a team of horses or a tractor or a steam engine, and you would physically have to put a belt onto this pulley right here. 2 men would fork loose hay into the hopper. As the machine turned, it would press the hay, push it back, and you would put blocks in it, and you physically tie it with wire. So it took 6 men to run this. So as a modern hay baler today, 1 man does it all. But in these days, it wasn't that way. This particular machine was from Pendleton County. It was underneath a log barn and collapsed. The family that bought the property found it there and told me about it. I went up and got it functioning again. So I'll show you how it works right now. Now, as the belt pulley would be on that pulley right there, turning it, the entire thing would rotate, which is what I'm going to do physically. So this machine's job was to take hay, press it into a bale, and then people would have to physically stand there and tie the bales with wire. Considering loose hay, this was a modern invention. It was a leap years ahead of loose hay, but it had its drawbacks because it was so cumbersome. It took so many men to run it. By 1940s, after World War II, everything was a pickup baler like we have today, and these ended up in the scrap heap. Most of them then ended up in the scrap heap in World War II. Luckily, this was so far back in the hills of Pendleton County, nobody knew it was there. It had survived. So I'm very glad that I still have it. Okay, what I have here, almost 42 pieces of horse-drawn farm equipment. Each one will have a specialized purpose. The one I'm pointing to right now was a 2-row corn planter pulled by a team of horses. In front of me right here is a 1-row corn cultivator. You'd ride on the back, the corn stalks would be right here, and you go on either side and cultivate the dirt and kill the weeds. This machine right here was actually a hay lift. It was used on the back of a large truck. It's in transport position. This would be on the ground. The truck would be sitting over here. And then as the truck went down the road, the bales would be laying on the ground. The bales would go in here like this and be drawn up the elevator and drop them in the back of a truck. This is a potato planter. Very few people in Campbell County use potato planters. The ground's too hard. So this would actually probably been used more on the bottomlands, along the rivers, or in Indiana and Ohio. But this had canvas bags in the back, and you cut the potatoes up physically by hand, drop them in the back, and then plant them for you. The next two pieces of equipment are also corn cultivators. Then we have a large John Deere plow, and then we have at the very end back here a small limestone spreader. Okay, now we're standing in front of a very old hay wagon. This belongs to the Baker family that I bought my property from. This wagon was made by a wagon maker and a blacksmith here in Campbell County in Grand Select. It's probably over 100 years old. It was actually made at two different kinds of bed. I've got the hay bed on it. It would have had a box bed too if you wanted to use it. What I think is interesting is that, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but when a team of horses is going down a very steep hill, which everything in Campbell County is a steep hill, how do you keep the wagon from running over top the horses? Well, the way you did that, there was an arm right here which had a rope on it. The man standing in the front of the wagon would pull the rope. That would press this against the wheel, and actually you put an old shoe bottom on it. And if that didn't work, you slid a 2x4 through both wheels, and both back wheels would slide. If that didn't work, probably what would happen is run over top the horses and everybody would be hurt. So it was a dangerous operation on these hillsides, but that was one way they tried to slow the wagon down so it didn't run over top the horses. Next object here is an old horse-drawn, converted to tractor, two-bottom plow. Now when the man called me up and said that this particular plow, he wanted to give it to me, was special, I said, why is it special? He says, it's a steel plow. I said, well, I have a steel plow. He said, this steel plow has a wooden wheel. I said, well, I never heard of it. No steel plows had wooden wheels. So he said, this one does. So I went down to pick it up and find out about it. What happens is the wheel on the right-hand side as you face it was always the one that controlled the gear, and you drop the plow because it had a cog mechanism in it. Well, often the steel wheel would slide in the dirt. This man or somebody before this man got it, took the wheel off and put a Model T truck tire on it with rubber on the outside, and it would drag better and would drop the plow better. So it did have a wooden wheel. It's not supposed to have a wooden wheel. This is a 1934 F12 Farmall. If it's a fully functional tractor, it cranks start. I'll put the crank in the front, but I don't think it's going to start today, but I'll show you how you would do it. This is the crank. What you'd have to do for the tractors, you have to physically turn on the choke and turn on part of the gas. After you did that, you put the crank right here in the front and turn it. After 4 cranks, that would build up compression. It's not going to start today, but that's how you would start the tractor. It's the tractor would require you to turn the crank to make it work. It has steel wheels throughout. And actually, this tractor has narrow wheels. Most tractors had double set of wheels in the back, so it wouldn't go into the ground as much. This one just never had it fitted. I put fenders on it. Didn't have any fenders. I just thought it was extremely dangerous to be on a tractor with steel cleats sticking up like that without fenders, so I bought fenders for it. Behind the tractor is a horse-drawn buggy. The buggy was actually 3 different buggies that were in pieces. People gave them to me over the years. They sat in my barn for over 10 years. Finally, I decided to do something with them, so I built my own buggy. I took the frame of one buggy, the wheels of another buggy, the tongue off of another one, and the box bed and seat off another one, and made my own. This is considered a hack. A hack would be a buggy that basically you would take out in the field just for short trips. If they had a cover over it, it might be called a doctor's buggy. If it was a little bit longer, then it would be a family buggy. But right now, it's just considered a hack. Basically, it's an everyday thing like you use a little wagon for today. Now, over the years, there was progressive development. The wagon I had showed you up the hill here had wood wheels. This has steel wheels. This was the next step after you got rid of your wooden wheel wagon. You went to steel wheels. Steel was very rough, but you didn't have to worry about your spokes breaking out because they were wood. So this is a big advancement over that. I have another two-row corn planter. The machine there in the back is a hay tedder. A hay tedder was a machine that was used when your hay was cut and it was very wet and it wouldn't dry. So basically, when you pulled it down the road, or the row of cut hay, it was wet, you sat on the front of it, it had a seat there originally, and it would go up like this and throw the hay up in the air, it would dry it, or help it dry. That's another potato planter. Okay, we're going to stop for a second. All right, now we're standing in front of some more old horse-drawn equipment. The machine here in the front is a horse-drawn mowing machine. This particular one's an International. Well, almost all the equipment I have there that's horse-drawn is International or John Deere. This is a very unique plow. It's called a disc plow. We laughingly refer to it as the rich man's plow because the rich man on the road usually owned it and everybody borrowed it from him. What's unique about it, instead of a normal plow like most farmers use, a disc plow was used for new ground where you had roots or rocks or something that you would catch a plow on. This would cut the roots up and bounce over top of a rock, and instead of breaking something or hurting the horse, we keep on going. I've got two of these disc plows here. Both of them are very unique. They're both Chattanooga plows, which was made out in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they were bought out by International eventually, which was a big farm machinery company. On the far side over there is a one-row tobacco setter. Two people would ride on the back. Somebody sit on top of the big drum, and as it went down the road, there would be a cog mechanism in one wheel, which would cause a lever to click that would allow water and liquid fertilizer inside the tank to come down. As you drop the plant in the ground, it would fertilize the tobacco plant as it went in the ground. There was lots of variations on these. This is probably a fairly late one, probably from the 30s or 40s, but it's not a very old one, but it was still functional. We can still use it today if we wanted to. Right here on the back side is a saw frame. You would have to hook a tractor or a motor to this belt right here, or this pulley right here, and as you turned it, you would be cutting firewood, and you'd have a table, and you'd put the firewood. It's a very dangerous thing. A lot of people got hurt in these things. Okay, this is a cabin this is my second cabin. Roughly 1992, someone told me about a cabin that was going to be burned. It was on property in the way of a house that was going to be built. So I looked into it. I felt sorry for the cabin. Of course, if I had known it was going to take me 6 years to move it here, I would have probably reconsidered. Anyway, it was a double log cabin infested with termites. So I decided to move it here. It was originally built in 1847, and I moved it here in 1992 and finished it in 1996. Now, it's not put together the way it originally was because there was so many termite damage to it. So that part of the cabin would have looked original, except it was sitting on the ground, not raised up. This part would not have been here in this position. I'll show you a picture of what it really looked like. Okay, you're inside my second cabin. This cabin is probably pretty interesting to most people because it's much larger than most people assume it would be. Inside this cabin, I've collected lots of interesting artifacts from Campbell County, and each one has a story. But the cabin itself was originally owned by the Herringer family. The Herringers did not build this cabin, but they did live in it. Mr. and Mrs. Herringer raised 7 children here. They all slept upstairs at one point, As you can see in the picture here, it was actually 2 cabins. This is the original cabin. This was added on later. A space between it, which was called a dog trot. And as you can see from the picture up here, it was closed in and made part of the porch. It was a fairly long cabin with a great big stone chimney and fireplace on the as you face the building on the right-hand side. As you can see in this particular photograph, this part's going down. The termites were in here really bad. When I went to take it apart and pulled the siding off of it, I could have picked up bucketfuls of termites that were in here, so I left to sit outside in the sun for 2 weeks before I attempted to do anything with it. It took me almost 3 years to disassemble it and move it over here, and another 3 years to put it back up. So this cabin was built in 1847. I'm not quite sure who the original builder was, but the Herringers lived in it a long time, and when they passed away, it was abandoned and it was going to be torn down when I got it done. Now right here I have 2 antique stoves. This is called a Franklin stove. Franklin stoves are almost like a fireplace, only it's just a stove. Not a good idea. They aren't deep enough. They didn't draw very well. You would usually have smoke all over your house. It's a nice idea, it just didn't work very well. Now the potbelly stove, which is what everybody had for years, got red hot when it did. You couldn't put very big wood in there, but it did. It was a very efficient stove. It put out a lot of heat, and ordinarily you would put it up, run it up as hard as you could in your ceiling, run outside wall, so all the pipe would radiate heat into the room as well as the stove itself. 2 machines here in front. This one right here and the big one are both corn shellers. You had corn on the ear yet, so after the corn dried, you'd run it through this thing, turn the handle, and it would shake to shell the corn off the cob. This is a grain blower, a grain cleaner. Basically it was after you cut grain, wheat, oats, or barley, it would have a little shaft on the outside, almost like a shell. And you would put it in here, turn the handle, and it would shake it, and then it had a paddle inside, and when you turn the handle, it would blow it. It'd blow the shaft or shell off, and the grain would fall out the bottom. If you wanted to make your own clothes, this is a loom. This is made around 1900, and this is made in New York, in the state of New York. So this is a loom to make your own clothing with your own cloth. I mean, not clothing, cloth. On the walls here are 2-man saws. The saws would have been what you would cut down trees with before the original chainsaws were developed. So 2 men had to work together with these. These were difficult to use. You had to work as a team. If one pulled and the other one pushed, it would work fine. But if both of you pushed or both pulled, it didn't work at all. So you had to learn how to use these, and you had to be very efficient at how you taught each other which pulled, who pushed. This is a broom machine. Now, most blind people have few ways to make a living for their family. So it was developed a way of making a machine that a blind person can make a living with. So this is a machine for blind people making brooms, made in Cincinnati. There's the vise. I'm pushing it down. You put the handle in like that. Broom corn grows like normal corn, except it does not have an ear. Broom corn has seed up the top of the tassels. So you take a comb the seed out and save it for the next year. Cut the corn off about right here. You hold it right like this. There's a rotating mechanism here at the bottom. You rotate with your foot. There'd be wire coming out, and as you did that, you'd basically be wrapping wire around the base of the corn stalk. That you are holding the broomstick. After you had the corn on the broomstick and you drove a nail in right here, it would be a round broom. Round brooms are not very good. For thousands of years, everybody had a round broom. It took the Shakers down in Kentucky and in New York to discover that if you flatten the broom, it worked much more efficiently. So over here in this corner is a broom press. You put the broom in, you flattened out the broom corn, and you would physically sew it to make a flat broom. After you did that, your corn would be sticking out in all directions. You would take it over here like this, flatten this machine here, and put that down like that, and cut it off, and you end up with a traditional broom like we have today. Now the old man who used this broom machine was from Grants. Look here. This is what he put on his brooms. And basically, it's a little parrot with holding a broom, and somebody would write his name on here. He'd make his brooms all winter, and then somebody would take him around, and he'd peddle his brooms throughout the countryside. There was one up here in Grand Slick. There was one along the Ohio River. There was one man who went around Newport. So there was a lot of broom makers, and everybody needed a broom. Now, where I'm standing in this opening right here is actually the fireplace for the log cabin. I built this opening here with the intention of putting the fireplace back on it. Then after I got involved in it, I decided the room was 18 by 18. It wouldn't give me much space to display anything. So I decided not to put the fireplace back in. Instead, I took the fireplace stone and the chimney stone and made a base for this building right here. And then all the leftover logs that were salvageable, I made this addition on the side of here. So this is never supposed to have been here for the original cabin. What I have here is a very, very heavy press that you make apple cider with. You take your apples, drop them in the hopper here, turn the handle. That would take the apples and pull them downside, grind them up into a pulp, and end up in a big barrel-like thing here. You slide the barrel thing right back to here. You put this round pressing mold on top of the apples, screw this down, that would squeeze the juice out. The juice would run out the other end. That's how you made your apple cider. Now, right around the corner here is a large bellows. A bellows is a way of producing air. As you work, a blacksmith would work on things, you would have to have some way of making the coals very, very hot so you can bend metal. So this was a way of doing it. You press it down and air would blow out. And this is the forge. This is what you would have the bellows blowing into, and you would be able to take your horseshoe, get it red hot, put it in a vise like I have here, and then straighten it out, bend it, or whatever you want to do. This here is a large sandstone grinding wheel. This was donated to me by Elizabeth Clem in Alexandria. And you would turn it, and you'd sharpen tools on it, or whatever you needed to have an edge to. These are all blacksmith tools. This is the equivalent of a small blacksmith shop. A real blacksmith shop would be twice as big. But I have an assembly of blacksmith vise, blacksmith anvil, a blacksmith drill press. So I've got miscellaneous things. Above my head are my antique plow collection. These are all from Campbell County. They weren't made in Campbell County, but they were used in Campbell County. They're hillside plows, land plows, and turning plows. A hillside plow was specially designed that when you went down or you plowed on top of a hillside, you never wanted to plow the dirt down the hill because then it would all wash away. So a hillside plow was designed that when you plowed with it, it would throw the dirt uphill. When you got to the end of the row, you'd pick the plow up, kick it with your foot, release the lever on it, the plow would drop down, you use your foot, kick it over. So when you went back the other direction, you're still plowing uphill. So you always had that option. You didn't have to worry about plowing and your dirt washing down the hill. Okay, hanging right here are two grain cradles. A grain cradle was a way of cutting grain originally. The cradle was simply a hand-powered way of cutting wheat, oats, or barley. And after you cut it, it would be gathered up in the teeth here, and you'd physically pick it up with your hands, take a couple long strands of the straw that the wheat or grain is on, wrap it around and tie it almost like a shoestring around it, and then you come back later with the wagon, pick it all up, and make a shock or a pile out of it. Now these are two things sitting in front of each other. Actually what they are, they're scrapers. These scrapers were used basically to make a foundation for a house or clean out a pond. They were pulled by horses. This would go down to the front, you'd physically walk behind it in the behind and dig the dirt out with it. Very labor-intensive way, but it was the only means available at that time to dig a hole in the ground for a large thing. These are various wagon wheels. Now this is probably one of the most unique things I have. I always wanted a piece of wood that was 200 years old. Well, I finally found one outside of Alexandria on Highway 10 by the Brookwood subdivision. This particular piece was a tree, a piece of red oak. The tree had died from a lightning strike. It was cut down. It was going to be cut up for firewood. I asked the owner of the property if I could have a piece of the trunk. The trunk itself was probably about this big around, but it had a hole in it, so about 10 foot off the ground, I cut this piece off. It took me 3 hours for a 32-inch chainsaw to cut this off. I counted the rings individually right about here. This is when the county was formed. This is also when George Washington was president. So it's 200 years old. Right above it is a 100-year-old piece of red cedar. This was the tree that was growing across the road. A big storm came by about 15 years ago, pushed the whole tree out of the ground, roots and all. So I asked for a piece of the tree. This is nearly 100-year-old. This is the same kind of wood that you would use to make cedar chest out of. When I first put it in here, it was a very sweet-smelling piece of wood. This is a buggy jack. This is what you would use underneath a buggy or a wagon, and you'd be able to jack your wagon up with it. Okay, we're going to stop for a minute. Okay, now we're standing in front of an addition I put on my barn some years back. People kept giving me large things, so I needed some place to put these things. So I ended up building this 16-foot addition on the upper side of my barn, left it open so I can put great big things in. This is a grain binder. Now I mentioned inside the cabin that I had a grain cradle. A grain cradle is what a man would physically cut the grain with. Labor-intensive, hot, hard work. Well, the farm machinery company came up with an idea of cutting grain with a machine pulled by horses. Now, it'd be difficult for me to explain how this works without having an illustration, so I'm just going to say this cut grain took 3 stout horses. It tied the grain with a piece of string or rope in a bundle. It was the very first machine that ever tied or did something like that, so it's a very remarkable piece of machinery. Probably the most complicated piece of horse-drawn equipment ever made. This is a 1915 International 1-ton farm wagon. Now this particular wagon has a long history. It actually was obtained from the state of Wyoming. When I was driving in Cincinnati one day over in Beachmont, I noticed there was a sign in front of a company, a silk flower shop, that said they were going out of business. I had noticed several times that they had a covered wagon sitting in front of the business as a decoration. So I went in and I said, "You said the sign says everything must go." And I said, "What about the covered wagons?" He said, "I don't know, I'll find out." So she called me up and told me I could have what was left of it. The bed was rotted off, this wheel was missing, it had no top, no seat, so I had to rebuild the entire thing. I decided to put a cover over it, even though it was never meant to have a cover on it. But I wanted one that resembled a covered wagon. An actual Conestoga wagon is twice as big as this. This is way too small. But it does have the wide wheels like you would have found on a Conestoga. So this was used for farming, and I designed it so that school children could come here, climb up my little ladder, climb inside, sit on the seat, and get their picture taken as if they traveled in a covered wagon. All 3 of my sons, when they were small, slept out in the covered wagon at least one night to say they slept in a covered wagon. So this is probably from about 1890, maybe 1900. It's not extremely old, but it was probably the last years they were making wooden wagons. Now this is also another belt-powered machine that you would cut firewood with. This particular one had a big blade there. You put your firewood here, you push it into the saw blade and cut your firewood. In the background here on the wall is a 1910 Baker Monitor windmill. This particular one came from a friend of mine's house in Red Cloud, Nebraska, 823 miles from here. He offered to give it to me. I went out and got it, disassembled it, brought it back. The tower for it is right over on this side of the building. I had it up in my yard for almost 15 years. It was a pretty old windmill when I got it. About 2 o'clock one morning, about 15 years ago, a storm came through and it just tore it to pieces. I ran out and tried to save the windmill, but it was already broken. The blades were knocked all apart, the tail was bent. So at that point, I decided that I wasn't going to fix it. I ended up buying a new windmill, which I'll show you in a little while here. Okay, hanging up here are pulleys. These are wooden pulleys that you would have used on pieces of machinery. You would have a belt coming from a machine like either a gasoline, diesel powered, or in my case, a steam engine, and belt would go to this, and then these would power something else. So this is a collection of antique wooden pulleys. We have two tractor, cultivator, garden tractors. These are 2-wheel ones. There's a 1-wheel one sitting back here. There's one identical to it sitting right there. Now originally when you went to mow your grass, there was only one option. When you didn't have any machinery, you had to cut it by hand. So this is a sickle bar. Now, old-fashioned sickle was did by hand. If you notice the resemblance, this is very similar to a grain cradle. It actually is a grain cradle, except it had the forks in the front. So this was used to cut grass. Then they came up with the idea of a push mower. So I've got 3 push mowers here. The one in front is a very old one. The 2 in the back were more modern ones. And eventually they took the motor and put a motor on a push mower. So we have a powered push mower. And then eventually you end up with what we have today, which is a very old gasoline-powered mower. This is my first mower from 1972. Now I have a very unique chainsaw here. Most people probably have never seen one. A 2-bladed chainsaw. Now it was actually never used both blades at once. This is from the 1950s. It's a David Bradley sold by Sears and Roebuck. It must weigh about 60 pounds. It's extremely heavy. Now, the thing is that if you wanted to use it, it was not balanced. It was too heavy. So you would take this blade off, turn the saw on its side, and you cut the tree down with the bottom blade. After the tree was down on the ground, you took this one off, you took this one, and that's what you cut the tree up with. So it was kind of a cumbersome, old-fashioned way of doing it, but it sure beat a 2-man saw like I was showing you in the cabin here a few minutes ago. Now what we're going to do now is talk just a moment about the 2 pieces of equipment in front of me. These are disc plows. A disc plow, a disc blade. Disc blade is what you cut the ground up after you plowed the ground. When you plow the ground, it ends up being in big lumps. You drag this over top of it to cut the ground up finer so that you can actually plant something in it. One's a double one, the other's a single one. Both of them would have been used by horses. But it would take a big team of horses to pull the double one, or the single one you could probably get by with 1 horse, or 2 if you had real hard ground. Okay, now we're going to walk down here and look at my steam engine. Okay, now we're standing in the corner of my barn on the outside, and I have a steam engine. This particular steam engine ran Gupter's Mill for 125 years. It's a Lane Bodley steam engine from downtown Cincinnati. If you know where the Bengals practice field is today next to the bridge, there was a big old building there at one point. Some of us remember it as a spaghetti factory. Well, it was not the spaghetti factory always. It was actually this Lane Bodley steam engine company. They made all kinds of products related to steam engines, including saws. This particular one was made around 1870. It was hauled to Gupter's Mill by steamboat up the Ohio River to Carntown. At Carntown, it was offloaded on Stepstone Road and hauled by wagon up to where Gupter's Mill is today. It was disassembled before it was taken up there and reassembled up there on the spot. It's a 25 horsepower engine. The main pulley is 7 feet high. It's 18 inches across and 3/4 of an inch thick. That's the second pulley in the center, and then an extra pulley on the outside. It weighs 7 tons altogether. When I got it, I heard about it years ago when the mill was torn down, and Leo Reis was the one who took the mill down because he wanted to save it. It was part of his family and my family originally who ran the mill. So he wanted to save it. He got in bad health in the last couple of years. He never really did anything with it. So I contacted him about 1.5 years ago, and he agreed that I should be the next owner of the steam engine. So I had to pour 3.5 yards of cement, 4 truckloads of gravel to level a spot out. I cut a hole in the side of my barn, and he brought a crane over that hauls septic tanks for the concrete business, and that's how we got it in this spot. So it still works, and I'm going to demonstrate how we're going to use it in just a moment. Now you can stand right there for a moment, and I will just briefly explain it. Okay, now the idea of a steam engine is basically an engine that ran off of hot air or steam. You would boil water by burning pieces of trees in a big fire pit, which heated a boiler. the boiler is I'll show you in a few minutes, is over on the other side over here. And the steam would come in right down over here in this section here. The steam would push the piston, which is over here, causing all the to move, and then you'd have a belt from this pulley and that pulley over the equipment that would power things inside the sawmill. Now this originally powered a grist mill. A grist mill grinded corn and wheat into flour. Eventually they ended up with a sawmill with it, and then they had several other pieces of equipment before it actually closed down over a period of time. Now I am not using steam. Steam is too dangerous. You have to have a boiler, you have to have permits. So I have an antique air compressor, and I have a 300-gallon tank, and I'm running it off compressed air. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on the air, and any steam engine worth its weight should have a whistle. So I have a whistle which is very loud, and then I'm going to demonstrate how the steam engine runs. Now I'm going to blow the whistle. Now I'm going to turn the lever on, and we're going to demonstrate how the steam engine runs. Now I'm going to turn the air on briefly, and we're going to I personally think it's pretty neat that a machine this old is still functional, still works. I'm using 100 pounds of pressure to push it. It actually takes about 25 pounds to keep it moving. I'm using 100 pounds to get it started, and then I only have 300 gallons of air, so it usually shuts off after about 5 minutes. I've run out of air. Okay, now we're going to look for a moment at the air compressor I used to drive my steam engine and two antique tractors. The first tractor we're going to look at is a 1958 Ford tractor, which I use periodically. It still runs fine. This tractor was originally bought in the 1950s and used to mow state roads. It's yellow underneath, state road yellow. It was bought later and used on several farms, and when I bought it, I've had it now for over 30 years. So it's a good old tractor. Ford tractors can be rebuilt almost indefinitely. There's thousands and thousands of these Ford tractors still around. Right behind it is another tractor, but for a moment we're going to stop and talk about this. These are the air compressor. This is the air compressor and the tank that I'm running my steam engine off of. The air compressor itself is 120 gallons. Tank is run off of a 1960s air compressor. Came out of a service station. Recently I bought another 130-gallon tank and hooked the two of them together. And you can see the pressure gauges now. There's about 50 pounds of pressure left in them. So these are basically what I'm built up the air with to drive my steam engine. Now in the back here, I bought this last year. This is the 1952 John Deere B. John Deere's are two-cylinder tractors. This tractor weighs 6,600 pounds. It's got a two-cylinder engine, just like a lawnmower, except this is a 90 cubic inch two-cylinder engine. So they call it Johnny Popper. It pops as it's got a big flywheel, and that's what gives it its power, just like the steam engine. So this is a very well-run tractor, and I bought this because I always wanted a John Deere two-cylinder. I know most people don't have fork tractors on their places, but since I'm a collector, I have a little bit of everything here. Okay, now we're standing in front of my windmill. When I retired from teaching after 32 years, I had a few sick leave days I didn't use, 236 as a matter of fact. So I decided to take some of the money I was going to get from those sick leave days and buy something I really wanted. So when my other windmill broke to pieces, I decided to buy a brand new one. I contacted the Amish up in Holmes County, Ohio, And at that time I decided I was going to buy my own windmill. This is a 27-foot air motor windmill. These have been made for over 100 years. Air motor windmills are supposed to withstand 160 mile-an-hour wind. It's anchored in the ground with a large stone base. Originally, windmills like this would be used only for pumping water. A lot of people say, why don't I generate electricity? Well, the problem is these were never made for that. These are made only for slow speed power, pull water out of the ground. I don't have a well here, it's just to look at, but if it was, it could pull water out of the ground over 100 feet. Now, the windmill itself is designed so that as the wind blows, the blades actually tighten up. It's almost like bicycle spokes on it. The tail of the windmill is moved around by the wind so that the blades are always facing into the wind. If I have a bad storm like one that broke my other windmill to pieces, this particular one has a spring mechanism on the tail that when the wind whips around, it actually pulls the spring back, turns the windmill off. There's a braking mechanism on it that keeps it from destroying itself. These windmills, well, if they're maintained well, can last 50, 60, 70 years with very little work done to them each year. Now, this particular windmill, it was bought in Holmes County, Ohio. There were windmills in Campbell County. There wasn't a lot of windmills, so we don't have sustained winds like they do in someplace out in the prairie, but they were used for pump water in Campbell County. Down at the bottom of my hill here, which we're not going down to today, is my covered bridge. At the very far bottom of the hill down here is a replica 1/3 scale bird truss bridge, which I built to take my tractor across at one point. I quit using it some years back, but it's still a covered bridge. Covered bridges were covered because horses won't cross an open space. So if you try to take a horse across an open bridge, they would be scared to death, thinking they were up in the air and they wouldn't cross it. If you have it covered, first off, a wooden bridge is covered because you keep the weather off of it. The second reason you covered it is a horse would think they're going right through a barn and they would have no hesitation about going right on across. I'd like to thank everybody for attending my my log cabin museum today, and I hope you come visit me sometime. I'm open from daylight till dark most days of the year, but if you want to see the inside of the cabins, you have to call and make an appointment. Thank you very much.